Hello, this is Math with Beth, and we are going to do Getting Ready for Calculus Part 3. So take a picture of this or pause if you want to try these first, and then you can see how I do them. There is another page. So I think there's 9 problems in total. So I'm going to start with these. So for number 1, we're trying to solve, which means we're trying to get the x by itself. If there's a fraction on each side of the problem, the first thing you can do is cross multiply. So I'm going to multiply the x plus 3 times the 2, but be careful, we want to multiply the whole thing by 2. So that's why we put parentheses to make sure we do that. And same thing with the other side. So now we're going to distribute the 2 and distribute the 4. And now it's just a normal problem where we're solving for x with x's on both sides. So I'm going to move the smaller amount of x's. And since I'm moving this whole thing, I'm not going to divide. I'm going to subtract. So all we have left on that side is the 6 now. Over here, we have 2x minus 20. And now this is just a 2-step equation. So to get that x by itself, I'm going to add 20 and then divide by 2. So the answer is 13. And that's it. For number 2 looks complicated, but it's really a fraction divided by another fraction. So remember, with fractions, we never really divide. If we have a division problem, we do keep, change, flip. So we're going to keep the top the same, multiply instead of divide, and flip that second fraction. So I can start reducing, meaning I can reduce the 3 and the 6, but I cannot reduce the x and the x squared because they're tied together with that other stuff. But maybe I could factor something to kind of split it up, and maybe there is more I could do. So x plus 5, there's nothing you can do, but x squared minus 25, I can factor because that is a difference of squares. I have a whole video on difference of squares if you need it, but that's how you factor it. So now I'm going to look and say 3 and 6, I can reduce to a 1 and a 2. And then since the whole entire x plus 5 is down here, I can reduce those. So I end up with nothing on top but a 1, but make sure that 1 is still there. And on the bottom, I still have a 2 and an x minus 5, and it depends on your teacher. Maybe they want you to distribute that, but usually this is fine. Just keep in mind that because we ended up with an x on the bottom, there might be something we don't want x to be. And in this case, it would be 5. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that x cannot be 5, because if you see, 5 minus 5 would be 0. 0 times 2 is 0. We never want a 0 in the denominator. So number 3, we're going to solve this using the quadratic formula. First of all, in order to use the quadratic formula, we want everything on the same side, and we want it in order so we can see what our A, our B, and our C is. So do you see that the first thing I did was add that 2 over here? So A in this problem is -3, B is -4, and C is 2. The formula for the quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of B plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So I'm just going to plug those in and see how much I can reduce this. So opposite of b in this problem means I'm going to have a positive 4 plus or minus. B squared means I'm squaring the -4. So make sure you do that correctly. -4 times -4 is a positive 16. Minus 4 times a, which is -3, times c, which is 2, all over 2 times a, which is -3. So 4 plus or minus. In here, I have 16 plus, because if I have a negative times a negative, that's going to become a positive. So really, I have 4 times 3 times 2. So 24 over -6. So 4 plus or minus the square root of 40. And I'm going to go ahead and split this up right now, just to make sure I know that that means that both things have the -6 on the bottom. So why not just split it up so I don't get confused? So 4/6 I can reduce. So it's going to just be a -2/3. But now let's remember how to reduce the square root of 40. I'm going to do it over here. If I split up the 40 as much as I can, I could first start with 4 and 10, because 4 times 10 is 40. That's a 2 and a 2. That's a 2 and a 5, not a 5 and a 5, because I'm splitting it up into factors, meaning numbers that get multiplied. So if there's 2 of something inside a square root, it can come out. So a 2 can come out. This 2 and this 5 are stuck inside. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply them. And right now that's still over the -6. So the only thing I can do now is reduce the 2 and the 6 to 1/3. Technically, there's a negative there, but since I have plus and minus anyway, I don't really need the negative. So if you have it, it's fine, but I'm just not going to put it. So this is my final answer, which is not pretty, but make sure you get those are two totally different numbers in real life, because it's -2/3 plus this and -2/3 minus this are the real final answers. But this is as nice as I can make them without using a calculator and rounding. All right, number 4, synthetic division. With synthetic division, if they give it to us in this form, this is a factor. We need the 0. So if x minus 1 is the factor, 1 would be the 0. So it's kind of like setting this equal to 0 and solving. Now I'm going to use my coefficients here. So I have a 3 in front of the x to the 4th, but I have nothing in front of the x to the 3rd. See how it's missing? I have a -5 in front of the x squared, but nothing in front of the x, and then a 2. So make sure you put your zeros if something is missing. Now, how do we do synthetic division? We bring down the first number. From then, we multiply those times the number out front, and then we add. Multiply times the 1, and then add, multiply, add, multiply, add. If you get a 0 at the end, it means that that was a factor. So this one worked out perfectly. So there is no remainder, but they wanted me to divide. So they want my answer. They didn't want to just know yes or no, is this a factor? So what does this 3, 3, -2, -2 really mean? Well, since I started with an x to the 4th and I divided, it now gets smaller. So this is a 3x to the 3rd plus 3x squared. So see how the x's just go down in power each time? And then that would have been my remainder, but since it's 0, I don't have a remainder. So it went in perfectly. Okay, if you want to pause once you can see these next problems, please do and give them a try, and then you can watch me complete them. So for 5 and 6, we are solving, but we need to be careful because we do have a square, which means we're going to use square roots, but there's a trick involved when using square roots. So number 5 is a simple one to kind of teach you the trick, and then we'll apply it with something like number 6. So for 5, if I were to use algebra, I would say I want to get rid of the square, and the opposite of squaring is square rooting. But the square root of 25 is just 5, and that is not my final answer. Because what the problem's really saying is whatever the x is, if it gets squared, it's 25. Well, 5 works, but -5 also works, because if I was to square a -5, I would get 25. So in this case, and in any case where we end up square rooting both sides of the problem, we really end up with 2 answers when we do that, a positive and a negative. So when I get to something like number 6, where I can't really think it through, I just need to know that rule, that when I square root both sides, I end up with a positive and a negative whatever. In this case, 4, because square root of 16 is 4. So in this problem, I have 2 answers right now, and I'm not even done. So I still need to add 3 to both of those answers. So I have a positive 4 that I need to add 3 to, and I have a negative 4 that I need to add 3 to. So I end up with two totally different answers. All right, 7's asking us to use synthetic division again, but this time it just wants to know yes or no. Is this a factor of this? Which basically means, is there a remainder? Because if it's a factor, there will be no remainder. So that's really what they're asking is there a remainder? So if there is a remainder, then it is not a factor. So let's try it. So remember that since this is x plus 3, I'm really using -3 to do my synthetic division. And now I need to take my coefficients here, the numbers in the front. But if there's something missing, I need to put a 0. So I'm going to start with my 2. There is no x to the third, and there's no x to the second. So I needed to put my 2 zeros there. All right, bring it down. Multiply times the -3 and add. Multiply, add, multiply, add. Numbers are getting big here. Multiply, and add. Okay. So what really matters is that I did get a remainder. It did not go in perfectly. So the answer is no. X plus 3 is not a factor of that function. Okay, number 8 is just a simple algebra problem, but just to make sure you're okay with one that looks like this. It's asking me to solve for capital R, but all I have are all these letters in this problem, which means I'm not getting an answer. I'm just going to get the R by itself. So if I'm trying to get this R by itself, and right now it's in the bottom of a fraction, the first thing I'm going to do is multiply to get it out from under there. So I multiply both sides by R to get it out of the denominator, and it ends up over here. So now my problem is this, and I'm still trying to get that R by itself. So all I have to do now is divide by that F. So I got my R by itself, and this is my answer. Finally, number 9, we're dealing with exponents. There's a couple rules you'll need to remember here. I'm going to do a video all about exponents, so you can look for that. So first, I'm going to do order of operations, which means do your exponents before you do anything else, before you multiply or add. So how do I square all of these things? Well, the 3 I square just like we always did. 3 squared is 3 times 3, so that's 9. But when I have a power like x to the second power and I want to square it, that is when we multiply. So that gives me a 4, and this gives me a 6 because I multiply. Now I'm going to come over here. So I'm going to keep that in parentheses for a second and do this one. -2 to the third power means -2 times -2 times -2, which is -8. But now for these powers, I need to multiply again. So that gives me a 12, and that gives me a 9. So now I'm done with my exponent. So now I really have this being multiplied with this. So again, for the numbers, I do what I've always done. 9 times -8 is a -72. But for my x's and my y's with their powers, when we multiply exponents, we really just add them. So this becomes x to the 16th and y to the 15th. So anything you had trouble with, look for a video on my page about that, synthetic division or solving equations or exponents or square roots, whatever the case may be, and you will find more help there. I hope that was helpful, and I will see you next time. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment if you have one.